Documentary on a leading chef reveals the high cost of success and failure driven by intense commitment to excellence. The rise and fall of the legendary Chef Charlie Trotter, a mesmerizing film tribute on Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Rebecca Halpern is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, writer, and producer. Her work includes multiple seasons directing the hit series American Greed and Gangland and the critically acclaimed six-part series Helter Skelter. This documentary, Love Charlie, the rise and fall of Chef Charlie Trotter, which won the Best of the Fest at the 2021 Chicago International Film Festival. She has a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University, where as an undergrad she played on the varsity golf team. Impressive for this stuffer who took up golf at 60. She's a graduate of the highly regarded New Trier High School, which I mentioned because my brother's kids went there, and Chef Charlie went there. Charlie Trotter revolutionized American cuisine and paved the way for today's celebrity chefs. His Chicago restaurant, one of the world's top dining destinations at the time. With exclusive access to never-before-seen material, the film reveals Charlie's relentless pursuit of excellence and features, among others, Emeril Lagasse and Wolfgang Puck. Welcome to the show, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Jim. I'm excited to be here.
And as I say, it looks a little bit on the surface like it'd be out of our lane, but the drive for success, the intense excellence focus, and of course, it's entrepreneurial to build your own restaurant. Tell us first why you did this and how it came about.
So my producer, Renee Frigo of Oak Street Pictures, is the founder of Lucchini Olive Oil. And Charlie Trotter discovered her olive oil and helped champion it throughout the years. And when he passed away, she wanted to pay homage to him. So she created a short film, and it premiered at the Sonoma Film Festival. And Ray Harris, who was the former vice chairman of Morgan Stanley and Charlie Trotter's best customer, ate there 424 times, which we can talk about later. But he saw the film, and the two of them connected and decided to make it a feature-length documentary. And my name came up in some conversations that Renee was having around that to direct, and I took the meeting. Like you said, I went to Charlie Trotter's high school. I grew up in his hometown. My mother was a food writer in Chicago in the 1980s and 90s. My dad was a builder in Chicago. And so the whole world of Charlie Trotter was basically in my blood. And when I went into that meeting, I just felt in my bones like it was my project to direct. And I was very lucky that I got chosen. There was Renee tells me there were 10 other directors that they were looking at, and I must have said something right because I was chosen, and I'm so grateful for that experience. We started production on day one of the COVID lockdown. As you mentioned earlier, I produced Helter Skelter for Epix Network, which is a six-part series about Charles Manson and the 1960s. And Renee and Ray hired me before that contract was up. And I was very blessed and lucky that they were willing to wait for me to finish that. But during that time, I was able to do a lot of legwork on the development of the film. And so we were able to get Charlie Trotter's family on board. His first wife, really got on board. Yes. And the rest was history.
I have to tell you, Ray Harris, who I worked with at Morgan's, actually was Dean Witter then. And of course, he went to the top and I went out. But he was very highly complimentary of you and your research habits. And he's great at putting this together. How do you have 424 meals there, which the film says also was never the same meal? And I hope he was on an expense account for those.
Well, the funny thing is those meals took about 3 hours to eat. And so if you do the math, 424 times 3 hours, that's 53 days of his life that he's
vice chairman of Morgan Stanley, where he's theoretically has a job,
Yeah, he's a machine, an eating and a numbers machine. I don't know.
And he looks great. I figured, well, you got to weigh 300 pounds because, he's eating in restaurants like every day. I'm on Facebook with him and it's a new restaurant every day. I don't know how you do that.
Well, it's not even like regular food either. It's very rich, like foie gras and other heavy sauces and things. And I mean, listen, more power to him to be friends with some of the world's greatest chefs and to be able to be that kind of a champion for them. You know, it's funny, when I first started working on this, I immediately thought of Peggy Guggenheim and Jackson Pollock, Peggy being a patron of Jackson Pollock's. And, every great artist and visionary needs someone who believes in them and helps back them financially. And Ray, in many respects, was Peggy to Charlie's Jackson Pollock. I mean, that's what he was.
How did he become that? Because he's not out of Chicago, right?
Well, he was flying into and out of Chicago every week while he was working his way up at Morgan. And so every Thursday night, he had a regular dinner at Charlie Trotter's. And then from there, it just grew into this thing where they would travel together. They ran marathons together. I mean, they were as close of friends as one could have, and I think Charlie, from my understanding, really got a kick out of not only the level of interest that Ray showed in Charlie's artistry, but the challenge that Ray presented insofar as Charlie wanting to wow him with a new experience every time.
Wow, that's really amazing. The title is Love, Charlie. What is that based on?
So before Charlie opened the restaurant, everybody knew him as Chuck. And through his first wife, Lisa, we got access to more than 350 postcards and letters that he wrote. And he always signed them Love C, Love Chuck. And when you look at the volume of letter writing that he did before he opened the restaurant, and then you look at the volume of cooking and the different dishes, 2 10-course tasting menus every night, in some respects, it was as if the letters sort of morphed into the dining experience that he was providing for people as a way to connect with them, to show them that he cared, to show them love. And so Love Charlie is a reflection of all of that. And it also speaks to that level of excellence that he was going for. A lot of people call him a perfectionist, and I don't think that's right. And I know for a fact that he wouldn't call himself that. Excellence is about the process. It's about all the love and care and attention that you pour into everything that you do every day, whether it's brushing your teeth or plating a 10-course tasting menu. And for Charlie Trotter, that's how he showed his love to people. And that's excellence. So it all kind of tied up in that neat little bow.
Let's step back a little bit, because a lot of people don't know who the heck he is. Tell us a little bit about his story. And I was intrigued, even the fact that he's American, right? Because all these chefs are from some other place. But tell us a little bit about it in the restaurant and everything.
Chicago in the 1980s was predominantly meat and potatoes kind of city. If you had a great restaurant, you were probably a French chef. And otherwise, there really wasn't much to speak of there insofar as fine dining. And really, that was the case across the country. But what you were starting to see were these regional superstars starting to sprout up. People like Alice Waters, Bradley Ogden in San Francisco, and you had Paul Prudhomme in New Orleans. And Charlie Trotter, in 1987, when he opened the restaurant, he was 27 years old. His father backed him in opening the restaurant. He had hardly ever worked in a kitchen before. He had been on a European dining trip where he backpacked through Europe, eating at 3 Michelin star restaurants, soaking up the entire experience to the best of his ability. He staged at a couple places, which is like interning. And he worked for a handful of months at various restaurants in the States for chefs like Norman Van Aken and Bradley Ogden, as I mentioned. And so when he exploded onto the scene, it really was this sort of prodigal talent that people were seeing, and they were floored by the food. It was French inspired with this whole new Asian sort of Asian aesthetic. There was hardly any cream or butter in the food, and it was artistry, which in the 1980s, when you're getting a slab of meat and a dollop of mashed potatoes, that's like something that's out of the ordinary. And he quickly rose to the top of the Chicago food chain, and then moved on to become one of the best chefs in the country and then the world. He was recognized by anyone who's anyone in fine dining as sort of a wunderkind. And for the next 25 years, he ran his restaurant with great success until I would say about year 2021, when he started to encounter some health issues, and thus began the fall that we talk about in the film. But he was a revolutionary who innovated and created some groundbreaking things that we all take for granted today. Vegetarianism. He made an entire 10-course tasting vegetable menu. The kitchen table. Before Charlie Trotter, no American chef was putting a dining table in the kitchen. Nowadays, you walk into a fine dining restaurant, and you see that in a lot of the kitchens in America.
We're going to be right back with our second segment with Rebecca Halpern, more on Chef Charlie Trotter, Pursuit of Excellence. Stay with us. We're back with Rebecca Halpern, director of documentary Love, Charlie, The Rise and Fall of Chef Charlie Trotter. We were right now actually on the rise. Go ahead and finish out and then tell us the name of the restaurant and along those lines.
Well, before the break, Jim, we were talking about his innovations. I would say the thing that he's probably most remembered for are his cookbooks. He wrote 14 of them, and his style of food photography had never been done before. Before Charlie Trotter, cookbooks were a step-by-step guide on how to assemble a recipe. After Charlie Trotter, they were coffee table works of art with food photography that had never been seen before. He was shooting it in such an up-close and personal way. So much artistry went into his cookbooks, and he became essentially the godfather of food porn, forever changing the way food was photographed. Our Instagram feeds would not look like they do but for Charlie Trotter's style of food photography. And, he was best friends with Emeril Lagasse and Norman Van Aken. And whereas Emeril took off in the television realm, Charlie Trotter's more intellectual approach to cooking took off in the literary realm. And he really, yeah. And so
I was wondering why he wasn't as well known as everybody knows who Emeril is.
I think Charlie was an enigmatic figure who was not to everybody's taste. And Emeril just has this charisma and it factor that not everybody, has. But Charlie opened his restaurant in Lincoln Park in Chicago in 1987, which at the time was considered a kind of dicey area, but he wanted a more homey experience. It was in a brownstone that he opened it. And, it was a remarkable place. In the 90s, Chicago was the epicenter of the universe. You had Michael Jordan, Oprah Winfrey, and Charlie Trotter for food. And it's a shame that this all happened before social media, because now so many people have no idea who he is. And yet when you talk about his contributions, it's impossible to believe that people don't know, because everything that fine dining in America is founded on started with him.
It is amazing. I'm from Chicago. I never heard of the restaurant, and he just sounds unbelievable. Tell us, let's try to penetrate his mind now, because obviously coming from having done Bernie Madoff, right? Trying to penetrate the unfathomable nature of these kind of guys is really almost the most fascinating part. And I see in the shots in the kitchen, right, you just feel the intensity and just the almost the pressure. Did he have any fun, or was it? I mean, it's almost like a practice or a football team or something in there in the kitchen, right? And they've talked about the fighting over pots and pans and all that stuff.
The intensity in the kitchen is something that I don't think is unique to Charlie Trotter's, especially when you're cooking at that level. You're dealing with heat, you're dealing with time pressure, you're dealing with creating an experience for your guests that's an emotional experience as well as an artistic one. And you're dealing with ingredients that are different. I like to say, for example, like an artist will squeeze a tube of paint and know exactly what color and exactly what the texture and consistency is of the paint. Every day, a chef will show up at their restaurant and new ingredients will be delivered. And, there are so many invisible forces coming down on those ingredients. It's impossible to know what your toolkit's going to be every day. Even if it is the same ingredient, from day to day, a tomato can be different. From day to day, the meat you're getting from your meat purveyor might be different. And so the pressure that's on is high when you're dealing with a place like Charlie Trotter's, where a meal can cost upwards of $500 in the early 1990s, which is a lot of money. If you're having a wine pairing with the food, you want to deliver. If you're Charlie Trotter, you want to deliver on that experience. But I think what happened to Charlie and what we argue in the film is the person who he was before he opened the restaurant, this Chuck person, was his authentic self. And that Chef Charlie Trotter was a kind of role that he had to play in order to help make the restaurant a success. And when you play the same role for 25 years and the curtain comes down on that performance and there is no sequel, what are you left with? Charlie Trotter died a year after the restaurant closed, after running it for 25 years. And I think that that's emblematic of the fact that he got so far away from his authentic self, this Chuck person, that he didn't know what his next act was going to be.
His life, the restaurant became his reason for being alive, his mission, and when that was taken away.
Yeah, I mean, they call it a raison d'etre for a reason, right? And when you don't have that reason anymore, it's very difficult. And I imagine a lot of your listeners who are high powered in their own businesses can relate to that fear of chasing something day in, day out and not knowing what's going to happen at the end of it. I mean, staying active in retirement. What is retirement? Should people retire? What does that leave you with? I think it calls into question a lot of things. And Charlie Trotter, as we illustrate in the film, had a really difficult time balancing family and his personal life with his professional life. And over time, he just lost sight of the fact that he needed to maintain the personal in order to have a life after the restaurant.
Where did this drive come from? Because this guy grew up in wealthy suburbs of Chicago, on the northern suburbs, and was an American kid. He wasn't some guy coming into the country with nothing. His father was very successful. Was it to please his dad? What's it from?
I think part of it was to please his dad. His dad was a very successful businessman working in computers when they were just coming on the scene. And so he was able to start a staffing agency for IBM trained computer technicians. And he opened I think it was something like 50 offices across the country. So he grew up in wealth and privilege, but I think Charlie Trotter was an outlier even still. You can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have the talent and the ambition and the drive to back it up, you're not going to get anywhere. And he was relentless. I don't want to be an armchair psychologist here or whatever, but he was gifted in a way that the average human being is not gifted. He got that extra marble in his bag of marbles or ingredient in his recipe that many of us don't have. And you see it in savants, you see it in prodigal talents, you see it in these people who just sort of explode on the scene. I mean, I think about he's not a great example today, but it still stands. Elon Musk, for example, what he was able to do with Tesla when Tesla first exploded onto the scene. These are people who have a unique worldview and a vision for what they want to do. They somehow innately know how to execute it. They do it in a time frame that's outrageous, frankly. And they feel a ticking clock. And we talk about that in the film, that he had this sense that time was shorter for himself. I have to say, I feel like that for myself too. And making this movie during a time of COVID, when we were all isolated and locked down, where time kind of expanded and stood still. I don't know that we would have gotten as deep into who Charlie Trotter was if it wasn't for the time that we had to really go there.
What did he have any fun?
I think so. Oh, totally. I think Charlie totally had fun. I think he enjoyed needling his employees and trying to get the best out of them, which to some seemed manipulative, but to others was, a welcome challenge. I think he was a voracious consumer of art and culture and literature. He loved great movies and weird movies like Fitzcarraldo by Werner Herzog and Apocalypse Now. His taste in literature was really interesting, but he was reading some really intense, great books. Goodbye to All of That, for example, or Ayn Rand back when he was in college. And he loved fine art, and he was into travel. I mean, he did it all. I mean, this was a cool Chuck, who we say he was before he opened the restaurant, was just a voracious consumer of culture.
Listen to Business Talk with Jim Campbell. Take a look at my book if you get a chance. Madoff Talks, uncovering the untold story behind the most notorious Ponzi scheme in history, from McGraw-Hill, and coming soon as a Netflix documentary. And we're right back here with Rebecca.
Would you like to host your own radio program or podcast? Park City Productions 06604 is a Bridgeport, Connecticut-based radio broadcast solutions company. Follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Park City Productions 06604. Call us at 203-522-8801.
Rebecca Halpern, she's the director of a documentary. She put a lot of passion behind this, as we were just hearing. Love Charlie, the rise and fall of Chef Charlie Trotter. And in fact, you mentioned this briefly, but I read some of these chefs said that he was able to get the best out of them, and that he was always pushing for the best.
I think to Charlie Trotter, it was more important who you were as a human being and what drove you and your point of view and your vision for your own life than it was whether or not you had a particular skill in the kitchen. We interviewed Reggie Watkins, who was Charlie Trotter's first employee, who started as a dishwasher and worked his way up to becoming Charlie Trotter's sous chef. And when Charlie interviewed Reggie, Charlie was curious to know what drove him intrinsically. And he saw in Reggie a kindred spirit who moved in the same direction in his life that Charlie did. And I think in management, we all want people who are innately and internally driven to do well, right? Who are moving forward on their own because they feel this need to be better, to improve, to learn more. It's interesting to look at that in the context of today, when times have changed from an employment perspective and a management perspective, where when 5:30 hits, people are out the door, where going the extra mile, working overtime without getting paid is unheard of, and something, that's considered actually, abusive, right? I came up in a time when if I was asked to do something that took me into 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, I would do it gladly because it was identity building for me as a human being. And I wanted to make a good impression, but I also wanted to learn. Was it grueling and taxing and probably something I should have been paid for? Maybe. But at the end of the day, do I relish that experience? And am I grateful for having done all of that? Yeah. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell talks about it taking 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. Should people be paying you for all those 10,000 hours, or do you just want to be that excellent? And I think Charlie was looking for people who had it in them to be excellent, not people who needed that extra incentive. And maybe some of that was colored by his upbringing, where he didn't need the money. But I don't think it was necessarily wrong.
You're talking management, and this is interesting because it's so contrary to, and this is a business show, what you'd expect. This is Charlie. If it weren't for the employees and if it weren't for the customers, the restaurant business would be the greatest business in the world. Have you ever heard anybody talk about their business that way? If it weren't for employees or customers?
Well, I mean, he was making a joke. You can see it in his eye. He raises his eyebrow and there's kind of a glint in his eye where he knows that he's saying something that's a little provocative. He was a provocateur. He liked to say things that really got people thinking.
I can believe that to a certain extent because you talk about his father and writing him, I think, a detailed sort of, consulting thing. And in it, he says, you need to spend some time with the customers up front and you can't brutalize your employees, which I thought was interesting.
Oh, yeah. And that letter went deep on a lot of things. We got access to that letter towards the tail end of the production. So unfortunately, we couldn't mine it for more. But one of the things that we feature in the film are these collages where we lay out these documents, this letter that you talk about, or the postcards that he wrote. Yeah. And so if you rent the film on Apple or Amazon and you pause it, you can have an immersive experience with Charlie Trotter where you actually can read.
Oh, because I was reading that very quickly. Yeah.
And so it becomes a very engaging sort of experience in a way that I don't know many other documentaries that give that kind of opportunity or glimpse into him.
How big did he get? Because you talk about all of a sudden he's got other locations, right? And before everything smashed, how did he run those other ones?
Yeah, I mean, he had a restaurant in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, at the one and only Palmilla. He had 2 restaurants at 2 different times in Las Vegas, both of which ended up going under, but they were excellent restaurants. He was about to do a deal in Chicago. Well, he had just done a deal in Chicago at the New Elysian Hotel. And then he was doing a deal at Time Warner Center. He was in the Middle East. He had licensed his name to various sauces and dips. He was doing a smoked salmon business. He had 14 cookbooks. He had a television series on PBS. He was a busy guy and he had this empire. But the trouble is, if you're going to run an empire like that, you need to be able to delegate and you need to be willing to sort of change your brand to suit the environment that you're in. So, for example, Time Warner Center was going over budget and the developers were pushing Charlie to sort of make his dining experience a little bit more casual, a little less expensive. And he refused to go there. In Vegas, if you're a casino owner, you want your guests on the casino floor. You don't want them sitting at a table for 3 hours eating food. And Charlie refused to budge on that. He saw himself as an artist. And so I think he became his own worst enemy in a way, but he did keep innovating. He was the first chef to partner with an airline to do their first class service, United Airlines. He was their chef. And so when 2008 happened and, the crash came, many of Charlie's ventures went away. And, he was also dealing with some health issues at that time, too, that prevented him from innovating and moving at the same pace that he was going before. And you have to want.
Was he crushed when the empire started to go?
I think the turning point for him when he started to realize his own sort of fallibility was at 9/11. He was on a plane. I know this predates
Ray Harris.
Yeah, he was on a plane sitting on the tarmac. I believe it was at LaGuardia. I could be wrong. Maybe it was JFK. But anyway, he was on a plane. He could see the trade towers in flames. He ended up renting a car and driving it back to Chicago. And it was on that drive that he sort of started to realize that the restaurant really wasn't that meaningful anymore. 4 years later, he started suffering from mini strokes. And then, over time, his health declined. And when the crash happened, 2008, that was only 4 years before the restaurant closed. Michelin comes in, awards him 2 stars, awards his enemy, Grant Achatz, 3 stars. The next year, the same thing happens. I mean, it's just this precipitous fall at that.
Why do you think he went down to a 2? Were they fair or?
Oh, well, I mean, Ray says it in the film that, for 20 or 21 years, he was running a 3 Michelin star restaurant. I think it was a timing issue. It all just kind of converged. He had the pressure of the post 2008 crash on him. He had his health issues. He couldn't manage the restaurant to the degree that he could before because his mental capacity was starting to fail. He was drinking more than ever before, which we kind of touch on in the film, but I didn't really want to dive too deep into that, because then it would become a movie about alcoholic chefs, and I just didn't need to go there. But there were a number of things that started to happen.
Why did his health go down initially? Was there
he had an inoperable brain aneurysm.
Oh.
And he was drinking and self-medicating that way. And the stress of running a business for that long just takes a toll. 2 different 10-course tasting menus every night, 20 different dishes every night for 25 years. That's like, most restaurants won't do more than 4 seasonal menus every year. So it's a much different deal.
Talk about his personal life a little bit now. His at least one marriage failed, right? Well,
he had 2 marriages that failed, and he was married to his 3rd wife at the time that he died.
Talk about those trade-offs, and I was impressed. At least the first wife, I remember, she was very, very complimentary and a big role in the documentary, right? But he just couldn't live with him, I guess.
She was a huge part in opening the restaurant with him. She went to college with him, Lisa. They were friends in college, and then they got engaged and got married at the same time that he was opening the restaurant. And they worked very closely together to open it. And in fact, I think history will now show her role as it really was, because she was instrumental in helping him get it set up.
Let's finish that final segment coming right up. Final segment with Rebecca Halpern, Director Love, Charlie, the Rise and Fall of Chef Charlie Trotter. You were talking about the challenges in his personal life.
Yeah. So Lisa Ehrlich in the film, who was Charlie's first wife, is sort of for us the glimpse into who he was before he opened the restaurant, back when people called him Chuck. As soon as he opened the restaurant and had to assume this role of Chef Charlie Trotter, his marriage with Lisa fractured. They got divorced. He quickly remarried a woman named Lynn, who in the film, when you look at the 2 of them, they couldn't be more different looking anyway. Lynn was sort of this glamorous, blonde, almost a babe, if you will. And Lisa, was much more intellectual and bookish and approached the work at the restaurant with a great degree of professionalism and integrity. And we didn't go too deep into his personal life as it relates to his marriages to Lynn and then his 3rd wife, Rochelle, because I think all you needed to know about his personal life was that he couldn't keep it in balance. I'm not interested in muckraking. I'm not interested in downfall porn. I watched the Tiger Woods documentary, speaking of golf, and I just wanted to throw up because I constantly felt like this is a champion. Tiger Woods, for all his flaws, is a champion. And what am I watching but a supermarket sort of smut hit job.
Tabloid stuff, yeah. Let's talk about, there's a quote in some interview I read of yours. This is it's a cautionary tale, not a tragedy, not an inspiring piece. That's an interesting, juxtaposition. Talk about that.
Well, it was a very big challenge to make sure that people felt inspired by him, that they also liked him, that they disliked him in the right moments, that they felt empathy for him after the fall. I wanted people to see all sides, and walking that tightrope was a really big challenge. But ultimately what it came down to, the film is a cautionary tale of what happens when your identity becomes tied to your work.
Wow.
And we boiled the whole movie down to one word when we were developing it. And that word was identity. It wasn't food. It wasn't cuisine. It wasn't cooking. It was identity. And I think that's why the film is resonating not just with foodies, but with a business community as well.
I want to ask too about this as we get towards the end. He had scholarship, which I was very impressed. The numbers. Talk about that.
So Charlie Trotter was extremely philanthropic. For several days a week, he would have a group of students come to the restaurant. He would feed them 10-course tasting menus. These would be experiences that they never would get otherwise. And his chefs would come out and teach them about excellence. He had the Trotter Project, which was a charity that was set up in his name, where he was offering scholarships to more than I think something like 38,000 people at the time of our production had participated in his excellence and mentorship programs. And he cared a lot about giving back to the community. He pioneered a lot of the ways that chefs these days give their time and their cooking to charitable organizations. People could buy at auction for a charity a day in his kitchen, where they got to cook in his kitchen for a day. They could buy him and his staff to come to their home and cook in their home at charitable auctions. I mean, these were interesting, innovative ways to sort of raise money for other charities. And he raised more than $5 million at the time for his, for himself and countless other, charities as well.
Did he make a huge amount from that restaurant? There's a line in the movie where Ray Harris says, you should have been an investment banker. They make millions. He said, how do you know I don't?
I think Charlie Trotter did do very well for himself. I don't think it was like this astronomical amount of money that he made, but it was certainly enough that he could leave his son, Dylan, with a comfortable nest egg for him. And he had his own estate, he had an estate. And I do think he was a success by most people's measure. But I don't think he was like astronomically wealthy.
Does his how's his family received your documentary? How do they feel about it?
Thankfully, they're very supportive. From the beginning, we made it clear we wanted to tell a warts and all kind of a story, and they were on board with that. They knew who Charlie was. They knew the ups, they knew the downs, they knew his shortfalls, they knew his strengths, and they wanted us to explore those. And we were very lucky in that way. When I assess what kind of a documentary I want to work on, a lot of times it's about who can I get access to and who's going to be a willing participant in that. If they were not willing, it would have been extremely difficult for us to get this over the line.
Tell us about your own, what I call charitable endeavor, this thing called Facets. Tell us about that.
Facets Multimedia is one of the longest running film organizations in Chicago. We provide education to underprivileged students throughout Chicago in film and storytelling. We also run Chicago International Children's Film Festival, which is the only Oscars-sanctioned children's film festival east of the Mississippi. And we have a facility in Chicago where we provide independent filmmakers an opportunity to come and screen their films and experience filmmaking. And it's a wonderful organization founded by Milos Stelik, who is a film scholar himself. And I'm just grateful to have been involved for the last, 15, 20 years, give or take.
Very impressive. Do you know what you're doing next?
Well, I have another film that just premiered at Doc NYC called Who is Stan Smith, about the iconic sneaker and tennis player, Stan Smith, who has his name on one of Adidas's most popular selling shoes. I have a Stan
Smith story for you. We were in London in a hotel. It was during Wimbledon, and my grandmother was thrown out of Russia, right? We're in the lobby, and Stan Smith is there. And my grandmother runs up to him, Mr. Smith, will you take a picture with my grandsons? He says, yes. But we weren't there yet. And he makes the poor guy wait like 10 minutes to take a picture with us. And he did it.
He's extremely gracious. I wrote and produced that film. Danny Lee was the director. So I did that. And then I show ran forthcoming Netflix series that will be out in 2024 that I can't really discuss, but it takes me back to my true crime days, which I'm excited about. And I'm looking for my next big thing at the moment. I'm in production on another series for Hulu that I can't really talk about. It's a lot of NDA business here in Hollywood.
All right. The documentary, again, is Love, Charlie, The Rise and Fall of Chef Charlie Trotter, and it is getting a lot of action, well beyond the foodies. How can people see it?
You can rent it or purchase it on Apple or Amazon. We're currently number 2 on Apple's documentary charts and number 7 on the independent film chart. We're the highest rated documentary on that chart. So we're very excited about that. Please check it out if you haven't yet. It's quite an engaging film.
Well, you can certainly feel your passion coming through. This has been Business Talk with Jim Campbell. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, jimcampbellradio.com, get our podcast at iTunes, and the book, Madoff Talks, Uncovering the Truth Behind the Most Notorious Ponzi Scheme in History from McGraw-Hill, coming soon from Netflix. Get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, or your local bookstores. Help them out. Thanks to Rebecca Halpern. Great to have her. Thanks to our national audience, everybody in the next edition of Business Talk with Jim Campbell. From Philly to Fresno, Brooklyn to Boston, Data Cable Superstars has the best prices on installation of Cat 5 and Cat 6 wiring for cameras, computers, phone, and data, specializing in off-peak installs as to not interrupt your workflow. If this is an I need it done yesterday situation, then it's time to call Data Cable Superstars at 203-942-1427 or go to datacablesuperstars.com. That's datacablesuperstars, all one word, .com. Data Cable Superstars, where estimates and big ideas are always free.